Hi, I'm making Armenian bread today. We sometimes call this pita bread, or you might think of it as a pocket bread because it's not like regular pita bread, which is pretty flat and kind of tasteless. This has more of a thicker texture to it. It makes a great bread for dipping into hummus, or you can fill it with anything that you want, really. We used to always make it around the holidays, and we're gonna try it today. This is a recipe that my grandma and my Aunt Izzy used to make, my grandma Alice, and we are going to start with flour. Now let me tell you about the flour that I'm using. Normally, my grandma would always use a 5-pound bag of Gold Meadow all-purpose flour. And I have used that before, but I live in Utah and we're able to get Lehigh Roller Mills flour here, which I have felt like is a really good bread flour. And so I do use that, and I think I get better results with it. So if you can get a hold of Lehigh Roller Mill flour, you might want to try that. But right now I've got a scale because since my grandma would use a 5-pound bag, I just want to use 5 pounds of flour. So I've actually weighed this container as well, and I'm just going to make sure that I get up to 5 pounds of flour here. And I so far have about 15 cups of flour in here. And the thing about flour is it's not exact like when you're making you know, a cake recipe or something. But I am trying to get, oh, there we are. We're at exactly 5 pounds, not including the container. Okay, so I've got my flour measured out, and I'm going to pour that in here, this big bowl. Let's see if you guys can see this. Okay, so this is the big bowl of all the flour. And to the bowl of flour, I'm also gonna add the salt. So it calls for a tablespoon of salt. Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna stir that up a little bit. Now after I mix this up a little bit, I need to get my yeast going. So I've got a 1/2 cup of water in here, and it's, you know, warm, tepid water. And I've got 2 packs of the active dry yeast. And I actually just ran to the store because I didn't have any of this yeast. Now you can also use, you can use instant yeast, but you have to convert it, and it's, what you do is you add like 75% of this compared to this. So I'll give the measurements on the blog if you want to use that instead. But my grandma always used the active dry yeast, her and my Aunt Izzy, when they would make it. So that's what I'm going to use. So I'm just gonna pour 2 packets, because again, this was a lot of flour. It was, I think we got between like 15 and 16 cups of flour. And, but again, it was 5 pounds. Okay, so we've got 2 packets of the active dry yeast, and we want to add 2 teaspoons of sugar to that yeast to get it to start to foam up. So I'm just going to give it a little swirl in there. Okay, and then we need to add 5.5 cups of warm water to the flour and the salt. So let me pour, this is 4 cups. And I'm gonna go to my sink and get another cup, cup and a half. Okay. I'm not gonna add all the water yet because I'm just gonna see if I've got the right amount of flour and water mixed together first, because as you learn when you're making bread, it's more about the texture versus like an exact proportion of flour and water. So we want to make sure that it's nice, a nice good texture. They say that bread should be like when it's all the dough should be kind of like the squishiness of a little baby's bum. So you could kind of use that as a guide. But I'm just kind of, it's all shaggy right now because I haven't started kneading it yet. And we're gonna just kind of combine the two. And that's really it. So you've got the salt, the flour, warm water, the active dry yeast, and the 2 teaspoons of sugar. And that's it. There's no oil even in here. Now, sometimes I think my grandma, and I do this too, would add butter to the bowl, which is kind of grease the bowl that she let it rise in. And so I will be doing that. So yeah, we're gonna, we're still waiting for our yeast to proof. And so we can't do anything. I don't want to add this until it becomes nice and foamy. I'm just giving it another stir. Sometimes I feel like it works better to stir it with a plastic spoon because sometimes the yeast kind of sticks to metal, I found. So let's see. I'm just kind of eyeballing how much flour I've got in here. And I think we'll probably be good if I add the rest of this water. Now, if I find out that it's too wet, I can just go ahead and sprinkle a little bit more water in here. And I will be using my mixer to finish the knead, but since this is so much and I'm gonna have to divide it, I'm just gonna go ahead and start kind of kneading it by hand. And it's a good workout anyways. But I could get 2 hands going if I wanted to take my ring off here, but I'm just gonna kind of work the dough. It smells so good already. Now let me tell you a little bit about this dough. I have to refer to my written recipe here. So once you've got it kneaded, then you're gonna, turn it over in an oiled bowl, like I said, cover with plastic wrap and put it in a warm place. Right now I have my oven preheating, and actually it's only on 200 degrees, but I'm gonna go ahead and stop it because I don't want the oven on. I just want it warm. And another thing that you can do, because it's a little bit cold actually today in the house, another thing that I can do to speed it up a little bit is I could put a pan of boiling water underneath it in the oven. And that's just gonna create a real humid, warm, moist environment for the bread. Now, I'm talking about speeding up this bread, but this is not a fast bread. So there might not be a lot of point to speeding this bread up. This is an all-day bread. You can try a shortcut or two like I'm doing with, the stove being warmed up and putting your bowl in there covered. And you can use the pot of boiling water in the oven as well underneath to kind of steam up the oven. you could do those tricks, but this, let's see, I'm trying to count the number of rises. You're going to let it rise once, punch it down, then you're going to rise it again, and then, let's see, then you're gonna form the dough into balls, a slightly smaller than a baseball size, and then those balls have to rise again for half an hour to an hour. And then you roll each ball on a breadboard, and then after you've you lay out the flattened dough between sheets to keep them nice and warm, they have to rise another half hour to an hour. So if I counted right, that's 4 rises for this dough. So it's not fast. Now it usually takes about 10 minutes, I would say, to get this yeast going. It is brand new yeast, so it should be active and working pretty soon here. Let's see, I do like the instant rice, or I'm sorry, the instant yeast though. And that doesn't usually need to sit and proof in the water as long. So anyways, but actually this dough is coming together and I haven't even put it in my food processor yet. Let's talk about where you make your bread, or where you let it do all the rising. So after I do the 2 rises in the bowl, I'm going to lay a bed sheet on my kitchen table, and I'm going to, because it's going to make a lot and you need a lot of room. So we've always used like a large counter area or a table, and then another sheet on top, and then a sheet of plastic over that. So I have a big clear plastic tablecloth that I'll put over that. So that's to help keep all the air, the drafts from getting into, you know, your dough as it's rising. And it gives you the space that you need, because you're gonna be forming dough, you know, balls of dough, I would say about this size when it's risen twice. And then, like I said, you're going to be rolling it out again, and then it rises again. So, I know where I was going with shortcuts. So this is a great bread, and you really can't do any shortcuts. You know, I have, you know, seen it tried where you use something like Rhodes rolls, and you roll it out, and you can do that. You could roll it out and make some kind of a pita bread with that as well, but it's not the same. It is worth the effort. That's why you make a big batch of it. And this is also the same bread that I use when I make latmagen. So that's going to be going on the recipe blog sometime in the near future too, is latmagen, which is kind of called an Armenian pizza. It's like a meat pizza with traditionally with ground lamb. I'll probably use ground beef, and with parsley, bell peppers. Anyways, that's coming up. Tomatoes. Okay, so let's take a look at this. It is definitely starting to foam up, so that's a good sign. I'm just gonna wait a couple more minutes and make sure that that's going really good and strong before I add it. And I probably don't even need to do a mixer with a bread mixer machine, but I probably will, just to make sure that it's not shaggy and the bread dough is really good consistency. But you can see that the flour is beginning to really incorporate and it's coming together nicely. So I have to say, I'm really happy that I decided to weigh the flour, because if you don't use the Gold Meadow flour, you're not really sure, you know, how much flour to use, because that would come in, like I said, a 5-pound bag. But I, like I mentioned before, I'm using this Lehigh roller mill flour, which comes, well, I buy it in a much larger bag, a 25-pound bag, and I think I've got the right amount. I'm really happy. I think in times past, I may have measured 20 cups, and that was too much, and so I would have to, you know, add quite a bit more water. So one of the drawbacks with, you know, the imperial system for measuring that we do in the United States is cups and sizes are all very different, and especially when you come to when you are talking about flour, because it's so, you know, if a recipe says to sift it or do this or that. So really it is pretty handy to have a scale, and since I wanted to try and get it exact, I went ahead and used it. Okay, I think it's about ready to use. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this in. I'm gonna grab a little spatula and just make sure I got all of that in there. And I don't think I mentioned before that the reason why you add a couple teaspoons of sugar is because the yeast feeds off of the sugar, and that helps it to foam up more quickly. All right. Now I've got, this is getting more wet because of that additional water. So we'll see, once I get it all in, I may need just a little bit more flour, but we'll see. I don't think so, but we'll just kind of wait and see a little bit. Now, if I hadn't been so impatient, I probably could have just waited to knead it until the yeast was ready, because it is kind of a little bit hard to incorporate it now that most of my flour is already mixed in. So, I should have taken my ring off. But I'm just gonna go ahead and keep doing this by hand for a minute here. And then I'm gonna drop the dough in my Bosch mixer here in a minute. I know they make much bigger machines, and I'd like to invest in a bigger bread machine, but I guess with how people have cut back on eating carbs so much, I haven't done a lot of bread making lately myself. So you don't want your bread too dry. If you have it too dry, I feel like it has trouble rising correctly. It gets dried out too fast in between all the rises. Okay, so just make sure I got all that. All right, so let's divide this now into 2 pieces if we can, and show you what I do with the mixer. And then that's when I'll decide, after it's kneaded a bit, that's when I'll decide if I need to add some flour to it. I'm going to try and turn this on with my elbows. Okay, so that's starting to knead in there. And one trick that they say to look for is when it starts to pull away from the sides of the bowl, then you know that your dough is ready. So let's see, I'm gonna grab, this is where I want my dough to rest. So I'm gonna grab another bowl or plate or something to put this in so I can wash this out, oil it up for the final, or for the rice. So let me go ahead. I might actually be able to put it in here. I just need a temporary place to stick this dough. I'm gonna go ahead and wash this now. Okay, so this bowl is ready. I'm going to go ahead and rub a little butter on it. You could use either salted or unsalted butter. And I don't know for sure if my grandma and my aunt did this. You know, they got this recipe from their mother, Mary Kirkchin. But I like to add a little butter. I just feel like it keeps the dough really moist. So I'm just rubbing some butter somewhat generously around the bowl. Okay, so it's starting to pull away the dough in the mixer, so I think it's ready. And it doesn't seem to be too sticky. I was a little worried at first, but I feel like it's actually just right. So I'm gonna stick that in there, and then I'm gonna do my second batch of dough. So it really did help quite a bit to get it going in the machine mixer here, just to incorporate it a lot better. When I've got them both mixed, I will just make them into one giant ball. I think my mom, when she's made it, she has a Cuisinart attachment that has a good dough hook, and I know most people have KitchenAids for mixing dough. Or as you can see, if I had just kept going, I could have just done this all by hand. It's really not that hard, you know, to knead dough. It sounds very intimidating to a lot of people. But yeah, so once again, I'm just gonna cover this. I'm gonna get the plastic wrap right now. Some people like to use a tea towel. I've heard like to moisten the tea towel and put it over. I typically just use maybe plastic wrap, maybe with a little tea towel over it, just to keep it extra moist. And you can also cover the saran wrap. You could spray it with a little bit of oil, just so that if the dough rises to the top, it won't stick. I'm going to do that. So I don't know if you could see, but I've got my plastic wrap laid out on the counter, ready to add to here. I'm going to go ahead and wet this towel. And just kind of let it lay on top of this while I'm waiting to combine it with the other. And I'm going to check on the oven. So I think the oven is actually a little bit too warm because I preheated it for quite a while to 200. So I actually just opened it up, and I'm going to remove enough wrap so that I can put the big bowl in there. Actually, I have my wrap at the bottom, one at the bottom. Where I'm going to put a pan of boiling water. I'm going to bring that back up to boil. And then the other pan will go above it. So let's make sure that this is going to fit. Yep, that should be good. And it's actually so warm, I may not need the water for this first rise. Okay, I'm going to wash my hands one more time. Okay, so now we have our 2 batches of dough stirred or kneaded really well. See, that just worked out perfectly. I don't need it. I feel like I don't need to adjust anything. I don't feel like I need to adjust anything on the flour. But now I'm just punching them down a little bit to combine them. Just gonna grab them and knead the 2 pieces of dough a little bit. I'm actually gonna bring it in this bowl because that one already has a lot of the oil, and I don't necessarily want that mixed in everywhere. I just wanted it to coat the outside a little bit. Okay, like I said, this is a workout. If I didn't say that. It's a workout. A little arm workout. It's even an aerobic workout. All this kneading. Okay, so I'll just kind of turn the bread over to get kind of like a nice little seam at the bottom, and I'm gonna pinch it so it's one big ball. And now I'm gonna roll it and put the seam at the bottom. So I've kind of rolled it around a little bit in the oiled bowl. Oh, it smells beautiful, looks beautiful. It's amazing. This is just the beginning. Now I haven't decided yet if we're gonna do this in part 1 or part 2. So we'll see how far we get today before the kids get home and a little crazy. Alright. And actually, I might just be kind of weird, but I'm gonna even put a little towel on the rack. I don't want this to like cook, you know, when it goes in the oven. And I just feel like I should have turned the oven off a little bit faster. So now I'm putting the plastic wrap on it. And I think there's enough air in there. Let's see. I mean, you could add a little towel on top for a little extra moisture. This might take 2 towels. Grab another little towel and wet it. Wetting it is something that I just read about in another recipe that made a lot of sense to me. Okay, so there's that. And I'm gonna put this in the oven. Maybe I need to move this so you can see how I have the oven set up. This pot is gonna go in at the bottom. It's not quite boiling yet. Maybe I'll put it on my higher burner. Oh, but it is steaming pretty good. So in just a minute, I'm gonna put everything in. I'm gonna put the pan at the bottom and the bread bowl on top. And you know, normally it could take an hour or 2 to rise, but let's see, I'm gonna take another peek, and it's about halfway high up in the bowl. So when it gets maybe close to the top or an inch or 2 at the top, then I'm gonna go ahead and punch it down. So we'll go ahead and do that. Maybe I'll get this boiling a little faster with some salt. Okay, remember that boiling water has nothing to do with the bread. It's just to kind of steam up the oven. So we'll just, let me go ahead and just put this in right now. Still nice and warm. Now my pan of water has a really good steam. Let's see if this fits. I didn't even measure. I could be in trouble here. Whew. I did not think that was going to fit with that handle, but for the purposes we're using it, it worked. All right, so that's the first step. That's how you make the dough for Armenian bread. Thanks for joining me. And be sure to go to my blog. It's called the stuffedgrapeleaf.com, the Stuffed Grape Leaf blog at thestuffedgrapeleaf.com, and sign up for recipes. We're gonna have an email list, and I'll send you recipes as they come. That'll be the best way to find out when I've added new things to the blog. And I'm hoping to keep this up for quite a few years, maybe forever, until, you know, we've covered all of the basic Armenian recipes in my family, and I'd love contributions from those of you who also enjoy Armenian cooking. And we'll expand a little bit with some Mediterranean recipes and maybe some other Middle Eastern recipes as well. So thanks again for joining me. I'm Janelle Leatherwood, and I'm really excited to share this wonderful recipe with you. I wish I could share the aroma of the bread dough as well. Okay, we've got our bread out of the warm oven where it was rising, and we're ready to punch it down for the first punch down, and then it'll rise again. Feels great. It's really moist. It's gonna be wonderful. So I think at this point I'm gonna go ahead and recover it, and I'm going to put the saran wrap back on it and the tea towel, and I'm going to put it back in the oven. The oven is not on, just to clarify. We are just keeping it warm in the oven, and we will let it rise again. Okay, we are done with the second rise, and I'm gonna go ahead and start rolling balls of dough. Actually, I have my table already. I was gonna do it on my kitchen table, but then I thought, since my kids were doing homework earlier on the kitchen table, I would just use my island. So I have a sheet, just like a regular bed sheet, and then another sheet, and then a layer, like a plastic tablecloth on top. And you could either get that at like a fabric store or a hardwood store. Now, if you don't have that, don't let that discourage you. You could do this like on a smaller scale and use dish towels, and you could use saran wrap. But if you're doing a big batch, then you probably do need this type of setup. I'm actually going to save about half of the dough for another recipe. So I don't need as big of a workspace as traditionally we have used when making Armenian bread, a whole batch of it. But I'm going to pull it out of the oven just as soon as I sprinkle a little flour on the sheet, just to keep it from sticking. Let's see. This is actually not the same type of flour that I used. I used the Lehigh Roller Mills flour, but we're just gonna spread that around. I don't want a lot of it. Let's see. So sprinkle your sheet with a little bit of flour. It's probably getting all over the floor and everywhere. That'll just help it not to stick, but you don't want too much. Otherwise, you run the risk of your dough getting too dry. Okay, so coming out of the oven, the oven was not on, it was just in there so that it would be warm and able to rise. I've got the dough that's risen again. And actually, before I yank all that off, I do want to try and keep it nice and warm as I'm working, because it's going to take some time. Let me grab a bag, a Ziploc bag. Let's see. Okay, so since I'm saving half of my dough for later, I'm going to grab a knife and just kind of cut through the dough. And I'll put it in this this Ziploc baggie. And I probably could have just done this before I did any of the rising. But at that point I wasn't sure how I was going to use the dough today. So this is what I've decided though. I'm gonna save half of it for when I make some latmagen. Just give it. So, boom. I'm going to freeze this. This is something that we traditionally don't use or do, is freezing the dough. But we'll give it a try for a future recipe. I think it will come out just great. Okay, so then we're gonna be rolling balls of dough about a little smaller than like the size of maybe a baseball. And let's see. And actually, because I split my dough and I don't have as much as maybe I normally do, I'm gonna have them be a little bit on the smaller side. So this is the size that I've got, and I'm just gonna put it right under and start covering it right now, so that when I add new balls to it, I'll just have to lift up the cover. Notice that I'm pulling the dough around a little bit, and then I pinch the bottom. That gives the top a really smooth fill, and it'll make the pita be really smooth and nice. So I'm not sure if I'm articulating that well, but you don't want to just, stick a ball that's looking like this under the sheet to rise. I mean, certainly it'll still taste good, but just to have it look uniform and smooth on top, you want to pinch it in one direction, so you're pulling the dough around to the bottom and then pinching it to kind of smooth the bottom out, and then you put your bottom side down under all those layers. I'm just gonna pull this, make sure it's pretty airtight. Okay, and then I'm gonna kind of cover the dough with the plastic that I haven't gotten to yet. So let's see, we've done 3 so far. Just think about our, grandmas of old making this maybe on a daily basis. They used to make this bread all the time. The nice thing about it, even though it is like an all-day thing, is that it doesn't take hands-on work all day. You can be doing lots of cleanup in the kitchen, as I've been able to do. I've made other meals, and so it's just kind of a therapeutic bread making day on the day that you make it. But it really isn't hard. It's just a little bit of time and planning. Since I'm talking, I'm kind of losing track of exactly how many I have. Let's give it a count here. So far I have 5. So I was a little bit worried that I wasn't going to have that many, but I think I'm doing pretty good. So this makes 6. And you just keep doing this until you've got all of your balls of dough made, and then you're going to let it rise another time for about 30 to 60 minutes. And you'll know because it'll about double in size, or it'll just look kind of like a little bit puffy. So that's what we're going for. And I will just go ahead and pause the recording until we've gotten to that point. Okay, now we're on to the last stage where we roll out the dough, and they've about doubled in size. I'm just gonna rub a little flour on my rolling pin, and then I'm gonna roll out the dough to about 1/4 of an inch thick. So you don't wanna press it too flat for the pita bread. And then after we roll it out, we're going to let it rest again for the final rise of about a half hour to an hour. And you really cannot handle it after it's starting to rise. So we're going to be very careful when we put it into the oven. And how we go about doing that is we are heating up the oven right now to 500 degrees. And when everything has done its final rise, I'll pull out a tray that I've been heating up, like a large light colored cookie sheet like this. And then we will put 3 spaced out on the tray, and we'll put them in the oven about this high up in the oven, so you can adjust your rack so that it's near the top. I've rolled out all the pita bread, and we are going to let it rest another 30 to 60 minutes. And I just want to show you, this is not something that my grandma taught, but it's actually working pretty well. I was having trouble getting it to rise again on time for dinner. And so I did my boiling water again, and I'm gonna point the camera at it. And I actually am simmering, simmering water in the middle, and I've covered it with some sheets so that it's actually steaming a little bit under the sheets. And I just did that to kind of try and speed it up a little bit because it had already been resting for a good hour, and I wasn't quite happy enough where it was at. So now I've got all the dough rolled out, and at this point I'm gonna let it rest another 30 minutes to an hour. Okay, we're gonna do the final stage. The dough has now gotten a little bit puffy since I rolled it out, and it probably could get a little puffier if you wanna just make sure it comes out right. And I'm pulling out a very hot tray from the oven. I'm using 2 pot holders to be careful, extra careful. When I pick up the dough, I want to be very gentle to not crease it or put any fingerprints in it. That's pretty key and important. And let's see, I'm gonna only be able to fit 3. This one I'm handling it a little bit more than I would have liked, but that you have to be very gentle. They're already starting to puff up, and then you bake it for 2 to 7 minutes. They're already starting to rise and puff up in the oven. And when they are puffed up completely, and just a little bit brown on top, you'll see just a light brown circle on top. That's when you know that they're done. So anywhere from 2 to 7 minutes is how I like to watch for it. Or it is anywhere from 2 to 7 minutes is what I usually bake it for. Okay, so they've been baking for about 7 minutes, and I'm doubling up my pot holder again. And I'm gonna pull them out. So as you can see, they're just very lightly browned on top, and they're really puffed up, which is great. And I'm just gonna let them cool off, and they're done.